Okay, I think we'll get started. So, hello everybody. My name is Mikkel. I am working in Aarhus in Denmark in Knowit Experience as a lead front-end developer. And I am here to talk to you about modernizing legacy websites. So I promise you in 29-ish minutes you will know how you can modernize a legacy website without really drowning in refactoring. So that's the plan. So yeah, I'll talk to you about refactoring a legacy website, of course, but I'll also talk to you about how you can sprinkle in components into a legacy website. And also, like, how can we get an overview of legacy UI components in a legacy website? So these are the things I want to talk to you about. So let me just like show of hands, how many of you have done refactoring before? All right, that's quite a lot. How many of you have done like large refactoring projects? All right. Did you enjoy it? Yes. Okay. Okay. So I want you to imagine this. You are at your office, you're at work, and you sit, and you are really looking forward to, or you sit at your desk and you go to the coffee machine at your office, right? And you go and you make this beautiful cup of coffee. You take your time because you really love a good cup of coffee. It can also be tea if you prefer that. But you take your time and it's a perfect cup of coffee. So now you take this cup of coffee, you take it back to your desk. You sit down at your desk. You look at your screen and you open up your email app. And now you can see that there's 0 unread emails. Ah, perfect. Now you look at your Slack messages. 0 unread Slack messages. Perfect. This is great. Now you can totally get some work done, right? But then suddenly, when you look at your screen, you start remembering like why you actually needed a break, why you needed a cup of coffee. Because you're 3 days into this refactoring project, and you're like, you just want a break. You just really want to get away from your machine, right? You have this legacy project that you're trying to modernize or to refactor, and these are some of the technologies that you have. You have jQuery and friends, jQuery UI. Maybe you have Knockout, underscore, Bootstrap, Moment, and so on. And it's all built by Gulp. So, yeah, it's not like you enjoy this. You really want to, like, do something else. And it's not like these technologies are bad as such, but it's like when these technologies were new, they were really like cutting edge, right? These were the thing you would use. But you know, time has passed, and you feel like you could be more productive. You don't enjoy making like jQuery and Bootstrap UI using these technologies. You kind of feel like you're playing this like really old machine. You feel like that you could be more productive, and you could feel like you could enjoy yourself more, and you could be even faster, and things could be better, right? So you feel like you could maybe something like this would be even better, like a more modern approach to things like a newer, updated machine. So you want to do TypeScript because you like types. Maybe you want to do like a component-driven development, right? You want to do testing, maybe, or write ES6, and you want to design some components with props So you design like this component API. So it's really easy to use these components. You want to maybe write in JSX so that you have this reactive data. You have this template that is state-based so that it all just updates magically. And then of course you want it all to be lazy loaded. So that the end user just downloads exactly what he needs, right? No overhead at all. Yeah, so this is where you are right now, and this is where you really want to go, but there's quite a long way between these. There's quite a long gap. So how do you get from this legacy to this more modern approach? Yeah, I think there are two ways. You could go the refactor path, or you could go like the rewrite path. So, do any of you remember these old game books where you had to read something and then you had to make a choice and then go to a different page? Any of you remember those? Yeah? Okay, let's try that. So, if we take a look at the rewrite path, you can see that there's sunlight coming through the trees. You can almost smell the trees, right? You can smell the leaves, and you can almost hear the birds singing. And then we have the refactor path. This is the road to the dark side of the wood. No one really wants to go there, right? Who wants to go with the rewrite path? Yes, let's try that. Okay, so we are going to rewrite this legacy app or the legacy website. So how do we do that? Oh, I know. Let's just pick our framework, our favorite JS framework, and then we'll just go from there. That's easy. But wait, there's a problem. All these frameworks, they just need one element to boot up in, to generate all the elements and to render everything inside one element, right? So this is probably a problem. This won't work. So you can say like these frameworks, they work best if they're control of the DOM and they like own the page, right? And the legacy side that we're working with is a CMS side. So that means that server-side rendering is really important, both for SEO and performance and all that stuff. And setting up server-side rendering of these frameworks on a legacy website, it's doable, but it seems overwhelming and really expensive for this client, and they don't really want to pay for that. They don't have the budget. They just want to pay for the next feature. So what do we do? Yeah, we go back to start. So we're back. Okay, so we learned that rewriting in this specific case is probably not a good idea. It might be in other cases. So we have to go down the refactor path. All right. So there's this guy, Harry Roberts. He's a really clever guy and also a really nice guy. He wrote this article about refactoring tunnels. It's a great metaphor, and you should totally check out the article. So it's about this concept with when you enter a refactoring project. You enter a refactoring tunnel, or just a normal tunnel, and then maybe you can see the light in the end. If it's a short tunnel, you can probably see it. But if it's a long tunnel, then you probably can't see the light. Or maybe if the tunnel is bending, then you can't see the light. So you don't know how far it is to the end, right? And then as days goes by and you move on into this refactoring process, you go further and further into the tunnel. And maybe after a week or so, then maybe you can start seeing the light in the end. But maybe you can't. So, and if you can't, then maybe you get frustrated. Maybe you get really annoyed that like things, you have changed a lot of stuff by now. So things, maybe they stop working, maybe tests start failing, and maybe you don't know really how you can get back to a point where you are safe, right? So maybe you end up doing like this git reset master, and then maybe just like going way back, just exiting, and that's fine. But maybe you learned something by this, but maybe, or you probably wasted a lot of time and also thereby a lot of money. So the point with this metaphor is like you should don't enter a tunnel whose end you can see, or that you can't exit from quickly and cheaply. So it means basically you shouldn't enter long refactoring tunnels. You should only enter short refactoring tunnels. So basically you can say refactor in small parts. That's basically it. Okay. So you can sort of like compare it to a house. It's much more cheap and easy to replace the windows in a house than it is to do like a full renovation, right? A full renovation where you do the floors and you replace all the windows and you also do the roof and the walls. That's a really big project, and it's also more expensive, and it also has a higher risk of being more expensive that you planned for. So if you'd only replace the windows, it's quite easy to see the progress because you're only doing one thing, and it has a low risk of being more expensive compared to the full renovation. So and if we go back to refactoring, then like low risk and showing progress is something that management people really like, right? So it's also easier to talk to management about this. Okay, so refactoring should be done in small bits. Okay, that's cool. So how do we do that in a legacy website, in a legacy CMS website? How do we even do that, and how do we modernize things in small bits? We can use something called WebComponents. Maybe you heard of these. WebComponents, they're really cool. They have superpowers. One of the superpowers, like the biggest superpower, in my opinion, is this: that they can be sprinkled onto a site like wherever you want, because they don't require this single root element like the other frameworks did. So you can just put them in wherever you want. So that's quite cool. They work in any JavaScript context because they're just native HTML elements. And because of this, they're native. It also means that they're really fast. So this makes web components like a perfect fit for refactoring a single component at a time, and hence also taking a really short refactoring tool. Yeah. So let's have a look at an example here. So this is a UI component, right? So this is an accordion. You probably have seen it before. You can click the plus and it will expand. You can click the minus and it will collapse, right? You all know this, I guess. So let's have a look at what a jQuery version could look like, or at least the HTML for a jQuery version. You have this button with an accordion class. You have this div with a panel class. And then somewhere in probably a big jQuery file, you have something finding these elements and looping them through and attaching events, right? When you click and so on. And then the web component version could look something like this, only the HTML, of course. So it could be something like my accordion, and then it could be using these slots, which is a web component feature. So we have the header and the content slot for putting in the text. So I think this is a more clean approach, and also you could go and find the jQuery code and just delete that, and then the logic that you had would be moved into this web component file. So this means it's much more manageable and much easier to maintain, right? So this is just a real simple wireframe that I did. So to illustrate that we can actually just put in components wherever we want on the CMS side. So just exchanging the HTML with, like instead of being jQuery things, we can put in web components instead. So this is really a superpower, I think. So a web component, you could it could look something like this, without the logic, of course. But you have this class that extends the HTML element, and then you have a constructor, and then you have the definition of it, you give it the tag name, and then send in the class. So this is basically it, like a really simple example. And this is all great, and I think web components have superpowers and all, but they are also pretty low level. So they need some help. Where do they get some help? StencilJS comes to rescue. But who is Stencil? Like, who is this guy, and what is this? So Stencil is this guy. Well, it's not a guy. It's actually a web component compiler, and it has a lot of gadgets, just like Batman. It comes with TypeScript. It comes with JSX. It comes with the reactive data binding and decorators for props and events and so on. It also comes with built-in lazy loading, so that, like we said before, end users only get exactly what they need. It's built by Ionic, so it's powering the Ionic framework underneath. So it's pretty battle tested and used by a lot of huge organizations as well. So Stencil is really cool. Let's have a look at an example. So this is an example of how a Stencil component could look like. So this is just called like my first component, and then you have this. You have, like, if you have worked with React, you can see there's some things I do, like of course the JSX, and there's also some things from Angular. So it's a bit of a mix from different technologies. So it's pretty cool. And then this is how you use it in the HTML, of course. Yeah. So there is something to be said about progression enhancement, because this web component is not about, it's not living inside of a big React app or a big other like framework. So it is living outside in the HTML by itself. So there is something to be said about progression enhancement and SEO. So there is a difference between using props and using slots. So if we're using props like this, so just putting in like section 1 and lorem ipsum, like putting in this content as props and attributes, then the text doesn't render on page like without JavaScript. It will be hidden, and it's not really great for SEO, right? So, but if you do it in the other way, like using slots, then it will be like server-side rendered. It will be on the page. The user can see it right away, and it will be enhanced when the JavaScript loads. And it's much better for SEO. One other point I want to make is that don't use JavaScript just because you can. This is really a simple point, but also really important, I think, because I've seen people just because like StencilJS is such a nice thing to use, so you just want to make everything a stencil component, right? But it's not really great for SEO in all cases. So, for example, if we take this hero example, we have this hero class, and we have the h1 and a p and a image and a link. Just a simple hero component, right? There's no really need for this UI component to be a JavaScript component, right? Because why? There's nothing that requires JavaScript here, so we shouldn't wrap it in a JavaScript component, because then it will be bad for SEO, and it will the functionality will be delayed and so on. So just a quick point about that. All right. So to sum it up, Stencil and web components is perfect for modernizing the JavaScript parts of a legacy CMS frontend. You get this component-driven approach. You get this robustness of TypeScript, which is really nice. You get better maintainability Like no more of these 3,000 lines plus of jQuery, right? Yeah. So a few recommendations with this: build all components in Stencil.js. Build all new components in Stencil.js, of course, and then your old code, like, convert it when you touch it, right? And then also make a plan for refactoring, like, important components to Stencil, so that it will happen at some point. And also make tests for when you are refactoring. Your future self will really love you for it. All right. So now I want to get into how you can make an overview of all the UI components in your legacy website. So it's really easy if you have like this legacy front end to get lost. To like maybe you get a task of you need to change, maybe fix a bug or change something in a UI component somewhere. Maybe you have just been onboarded to this project and you don't really know where to find it. And then it's easy to feel like you're on this quest for the whole UI, right? Where the objective is to see the UI in the browser on your local host. But it's really hard because you don't really know where it is maybe, and maybe you need to log in with a specific user to see this UI, and maybe you don't have a login, so you need to ask a colleague for credentials. Maybe you need to go to a specific page to see this UI. Maybe you need to go to a specific language or something. Or maybe you need to log into the CMS and add it yourself. But basically you just want to get started without being blocked, right? You just want to get going. So Storybook is a tool that I think can help with this. So Storybook is this tool. Like, is there anyone that have heard about Storybook? Yeah, a few people. Yeah, okay. So Storybook is really good for giving an overview of UI components. It makes you able to build UI components in isolation and also reuse components really easy. It makes you it gives you this ability to document all the UI states and all the use cases for a component. It's really good for both new projects and refactoring process, so it can be used in both situations. It works with any JavaScript framework and also just plain non-JavaScript components. So the workflow is like this: you build a component and maybe then you also document all the use cases and all the states of this component. You document these in Storybook and build it out, and then you take this component and you use the component in the real app and in the real site afterwards. Yeah. So how to get started? You install it by using this command, and then I would recommend you to start really simple by adding colors and buttons and checkboxes and inputs and so on. Don't start with adding everything at once because that will be too big of a task. So it's something where you get started easily and get small success with it and then build on top of it. And then going back to the refactoring before, like converting things into Stencil and so on, like if we're doing that, then make sure to also add it to Storybook and so that you have it in there. A story is like a unit test, but it's for UI, so it's sort of like a UI test, and it's really, really good. So when you add stories over time, it can get be a mess, of course, because you can get a lot of components. So I like to put it into 3 different buckets, these UI categories. So we have the base, which is the variables and the tokens. This could be colors and spacings and shadows and topography and icons and so on. Then we have UI components, which is like UI that consists only of HTML and CSS. So no JavaScript here. This is radio button, checkboxes, buttons, and so on. Then we have functional components, and you can call it whatever you want. This is just suggestion, but it's like UI components, but with JavaScript functionality. So this could be React components. This could be Vue or whatever, or web components or whatever. But this could be something like accordions and modals and toasts and so on. Yeah. So we actually made it. We're modern. We managed to actually get all these things quite easily within our testing or within our setup. So this is really great. This is cool. So the takeaways from today, Stencil and Storybook are perfect for refactoring a legacy CMS frontend, in my opinion. When refactoring, make sure to do it bit by bit, and it feels like it's slow, but really it is easier and it has a lot lower risk, and it's much easier to communicate to people up in the management. And also only wrap UI in JavaScript if you really need to. Okay. Last thing I want to say, I'm co-hosting this podcast, Code Splitters podcast. So if you really want to know more, then check it out. That's all I want to say. Thanks. We have a few minutes for questions, if anyone has any. Yes?
Are there any obvious limitations to this approach? Like what kind of frameworks would this not work with?
Okay, so the question is if there's any obvious limitations, if there's anything this would not work with. I think any system that spits out HTML, this would work with. Like typically, what we have experience with is like CMSs like Umbraco and Episode or Optimizely. So that's mainly our focus, but it could work in anything, anything that generates HTML. Yeah.
Just to follow up that.
Yes.
Would it be right to assume that anything that creates mostly static HTML, that primarily server-side rendered, but if it has any dynamic elements, how would you handle that?
Yeah. So the question is like if it only works in static HTML generating server-side situations, or if it would only also work in dynamic context, right? It can work in both. Yeah. So you can Stencil, they have framework bindings actually. So if you like React or if you like Angular or whatever Vue, then they have frameworks for the framework bindings for these frameworks. So you can make web components in Stencil, and then they will work inside of these frameworks. So it makes them very portable. So you can use them in multiple apps in different languages. So yeah. Yes. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, thanks.